clean meant environment pollution. So about 4 decades ago, MNES, the then avatar of MNRE, had a lot of innovative schemes to promote energy access through renewable energy. Energy transition also has the objective of energy security through restriction of imported fossil fuels. And this has been the focus for the last 2 decades, first 2 decades of the century. And the ambition was scaled dramatically post 2014. This does synergize with climate mitigation, but not on a corresponding basis when the capacities reach a fairly high percentile of the peak demand. I mean, such as you are having situation of some coal-fired power plants operating at PLFs approaching 50%, which leads to inefficiencies and therefore higher greenhouse gas emissions than would otherwise have taken place. Energy transition over the past 3 years has scaled up with ambition which were unimagined. So there's a very great focus on decarbonizing, which really is the essence of dual goals for energy transition and climate mitigation. Just to name a few, the 450 gigawatt RE power, 20% blending of ethanol and petrol, FAME for EVs, 15 million tons bio-CNG. India's ambitions in the Paris Agreement NDC were quite ambitious. And more heartening is that India is the only country among the G20 which is on track to meet its targets. So I'd just like to, from my side, enunciate a few key drivers for energy transition coupled with climate mitigation, which could perhaps set the context of the speakers of this very august panel. The first, of course, the scale-up of RE power generation and diverse applications, such as irrigation, clean cooking, mobility, industrial processes, and I believe this has already been done under various MNRE programs. The second is to have infirm RE morph into schedulable and dispatchable power through long duration storage. This could be battery, this could be pumped hydro, it could be compressed air, different options. Then coming to the distribution end, we need smart grids with IoT coupled with advanced power electronics to match load curve with RE power availability, including the stored RE power. That means decentralized, decarbonized, digitized energy. Then, with net zero emissions ambitions, we definitely need hydrogen, and not just green hydrogen, maybe green methanol, green ammonia, different forms of utilization of hydrogen molecules. And finally, which I would definitely look forward to getting NTPC and LNG inputs, is on CCUS, carbon capture, utilization and storage. I'd like to mention this because in the recent BRICS Business Council Energy and Green Economy, I must say that all 5 BRICS countries unequivocally stated that CCUS was required for, NZE, and they were talking about programs of that, and it was wonderful to hear views of NTPC and LNG on that. Since Mohit has to go, what I'll do is I will start off asking a few questions speaker by speaker, then go around the things, and maybe I'll complete Mohit's right in the beginning itself. So, Mohit, the early stages of my career was involved with NTPC, Singrauli, Ramagundam, Faraka. So it played such a pioneering role in super thermal power plants, extra high voltage power transmission for over 4 decades. It's one of the world's largest power utilities with among the best efficiencies. So tell me, how difficult was it for you to get your team to transit out of this? Was there any psychological barriers you faced?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Krishnan. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
And thanks a lot to FICCI and MNRE for having me here. And it's actually good that we have been able to join through a virtual mode. Yes, and it's good to know, Mr. Krishnan, that you were also associated with NTPC long ago. So from being a primarily coal-based power generating company and moving on now to having a very large setup on the renewable side. So I'd probably like to start by saying that we as NTPC are very clear in our minds that decarbonization, and energy transition. These are unavoidable and inevitable. Whether we do it by choice or whether we are forced to do, it has to be done. And which is why a couple of years ago we actually set out a long-term plan to have renewable capacity in NTPC of almost equivalent size to whatever we have on the coal-based capacity next 10 years. And incidentally, that's the portfolio I am handling. And that's the onus I have as NTPC takes this giant step or the giant energy transition movement. So a lot of things happening on that side, and maybe I'll take a minute to get there. But among other things, it's not only the plan which is on paper, it's also a matter of intent. And I'm happy to announce here that a couple of months ago, our CMD, Mr. Gurdeep Singh, had actually launched the Energy Compact Goals under the United Nations. And we are probably the first energy company in the world. I don't know how many after that have actually joined that. And probably one of the very few globally at that point of time. This was done sometime in July. So we have very clearly articulated that in the next 10 years, these are the things we'll do. One, of course, is doing a 60 gigawatt renewable capacity in the next 10 years. We've also set out targets for reducing our energy intensity by almost 10% in the next 10 years. So these are clear commitments, and we are quite clear and we are quite hopeful that with passage of time we'll be able to achieve them. So while renewable capacity and entering into the renewable space remains the primary engine as to how we transition from a fossil fuel based company to a renewable company, and maybe, it's probably no rocket science that 20 years down the line, renewable will be much larger in terms of size as compared to whatever we have now. And that's going to happen across the world. Culturally, yes, it's an important point. Because as a company, and I'm part of that, we all grew up working at either of the power stations and having the same setup. So from that, moving on today to a renewable setup, which is quite different in its approach. And one of the very important things which has happened in the case of NTPC is that much of that capacity we did on the thermal side earlier was regulated capacity. So there were no pressures directly to compete in the market. And now in the renewable space, we're actually competing in the market. And without much information, we had to do that. We started doing that about 2 years ago. And I'm happy to state that today NTPC has been able to compete, and we're competing. And this competition, I don't need to probably say, I see Kishore sitting here, and probably every important or giant in the sector backed by some of the largest corporates or the investor or the funds across the world are in India. The entire 100 gigawatt capacity on the renewable side up till now has been largely done by the private sector. But we feel that as a government company, we have a very important role to play, and we can create definitely a very reasonable size space for ourselves. Renewables in the next 10 years is obviously happening. In fact, today we already have a portfolio in terms of pipeline which we have already won, close to about 7 gigawatts. And going forward, we also need discussions with the government agencies, with the state government agencies to try a plan. And we already have access to almost another 12 gigawatts of land. So we are on track. The challenges will remain. And I don't need to get into the challenges of renewable because I'm sure there are a lot of discussions happening across the world about what's happening in China recently. Of course, that adds to another layer of complexity in terms of the module pricing and so on and so forth. But these are things which will happen. So energy transition, definitely. Renewable, an important sector. What's also important for us as NTPC is to ensure that all our coal-based capacity is actually ready to transition. Because the most important factors which the coal-based capacity will have to face is in terms of meeting the variability, meeting that in a very short notice, and without any specific loss of efficiency. So we are preparing on that side also, and I think you mentioned about AI and all these things. So these are integral parts. As we move, as we transition, the digital levers are very important. Right now on the thermal side, and more on the RE side also. So probably this is where I like to stop, and maybe if you have any further questions, I'd like to.
Yes, actually, you led me to my question. I think in NTPC's transition and considering your domain expertise and size, clean coal technologies would come in. Now, ultra supercritical, coal gasification, and do you have a perspective of CCUS?
So clean coal technology, Mr. Krishnan, is actually is something which we already adopted. So in the last 10 years, whatever coal-based capacity, and I'm not being very specific in terms of clean coal because that's much larger subject. Maybe Mr. Derek Shah will be much better placed to explain much more on the technology side. But we have been quite focused in terms of developing all our latest units, which have come in the last 10 years. They're all supercritical or ultra supercritical. In fact, L&T helped set up the most efficient plant in the country, and which started operations about a year and a half ago. That's in the state of Madhya Pradesh. So that's the most efficient plant in the country today. But having said that, we also need to be very clear. As a company, we have been publicly stating that we don't intend to go in for any greenfield coal-based capacity now. So that's a very clear statement of intent. And it's been articulated across the media, across various forums. So whatever we have today, and we have about 10 gigawatts under construction, so that's what is likely to happen. Of course, I'm not saying India will step back totally from coal. That's a totally different decision. That has to be done on the basis of the studies done by CA and the government and so on and so forth. So that's one part. So as far as adoption of ultra supercritical, yes. In fact, I'll just quickly add, given a minute, that all our power plants are also going to be compliant with the latest environment standards. So while climate change generally tries to talk only about carbon dioxide, all of our plants will actually be compliant on the SOx, on the NOx, and also the water usage. So these are things which we are doing. And I'm actually happy to say that NTPC is probably the only one, or probably the largest or the first one, who's actually doing it across the board. So all my 60 gigawatt of coal-based capacity will be compliant with the latest environment norms, which are quite stringent. Now let's come to the CCU side. Now on CCU, we have mixed feeling. CCU makes sense, CCUS does not make sense. Because S is storage, S is sequestration, and we feel globally there aren't actually mature technologies and mature methodologies which will help us sequester or store. And we're talking about gigatons of carbon dioxide. It's no small. So which is why the whole concept of net zero is kind of evolving. And as a person, I still need to wrap my head around that, what actually is going to mean in the next 30 years. I mean, just as a layman, my question would be, do I expect in 2050 the United States to actually sequester all the gigatons of carbon dioxide in some way? We don't think we have a technology on that now, at least not underground. And there are obviously no technologies today to convert the carbon dioxide into anything useful. We have some small pilots, but what we're trying to do, and again, L&T is a partner there with us, so we are trying to capture carbon dioxide, and along with green hydrogen, we are trying to produce green methanol. So that's the idea here, that if we can capture carbon dioxide and put it to some useful activity, methanol, along with green hydrogen, and today the world is going around talking about green hydrogen. IEA came out with a report 2 days ago. So there's expected to be a huge demand of green hydrogen. If I remember the numbers correctly, 850 million tons of green hydrogen is expected to be the requirement by 2030. And a lot of it, and although IEA still feels that blue hydrogen has some role to play, at NTPC we are very clear it's going to be green because we have probably the best renewable capacity going across. We have leveraged that and the cheapest renewable technology to make it happen. So CCU is what we are working on. We are doing pilots and we'll be taking it forward.
Thanks. One last question. Since you have such huge ambition, which is 10 gigawatt, in your RE mix, solar, wind, hydro, and storage mix, are you doing batteries and pumped hydro also?
As of now, battery definitely will happen. Pumped hydro is something we are evaluating. In fact, we have our teams checking this. So we have actually 2 or 3 ways to look at it. One, of course, is purchasing the hydro storage as a service. So that's obviously on the table. And probably, as you are aware, FICCI has recently also come out with bids with RE on an RTC, round the clock basis. So storage is something which is going to happen, and in terms of economics, because this is going to be a bid-based competition, so we have to evaluate. On the longer term though, we also feel that probably hydrogen, not naturally or not necessarily as a supplier of storage of electricity alone, But hydrogen, in terms of molecules, could be a big displacement in terms of storage for variety of users across the sector. So we are placing huge bets on the green hydrogen side as well to help meet the requirements of the industries as well as the great part.
Thanks so much. So now I'll shift the spectrum to the decentralized sector. So
if you permit, Mr. Krishnan, so maybe
yes.
I can.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we'll,
Thank you.
To you, Moin.
Bye-bye. So, Cohen, Google is of course doing some great work in the decentralized sector, distributed energy generation and localized consumption. Would you first like to give our audience some insights into your activities?
Thank you very much, Krishan, for inviting me to participate in this event. Really glad to be here. And indeed for something different now. I represent GOGLA. We are the Global Association for the Off-Grid Solar Industry, and that includes technologies such as solar lanterns, solar home systems, and the appliances that come with it, such as television and fridges, and standalone solar-powered product-of-use solutions, such as solar water pumps. India has traditionally been one of the main market countries for our industry. In the last decade, tens of millions of solar lighting products have been sold in India, particularly to poor and rural households that weren't served by grid power yet. And the market for this traditionally has been rather split in fairly equal parts. One part included Indian manufactured products, sold and distributed mostly through government schemes and built through Indian tender requirements and BIS product standards. And the other half consisting of imported products that were designed for customers globally and built to IEC technology standards, which have been mostly sold via commercial retail channels and microfinance institutions. Beyond India, the other main market for off-grid solar products is Sub-Saharan Africa. We've noted, however, for many years that the presence of Indian companies and products on the African market has been much less than one might expect. And we think that is mainly because of the application of different standards in India and globally. Now, of course, as the electricity grid service in India has dramatically expanded in the last few years, market demand is rapidly changing. And GOGLA members in India are expanding into solar-powered appliances such as fans, fridges, pumps, agro-processing, and are seeking ways to adjust their capacities with their solar home systems to new market demands for backup power and decentralized solar power generation. As an industry, we need to reinvent ourselves to find new ways of distributing our products and services to new customer segments through new market channels and new cooperation schemes with government. And we also need to work on new standards around interconnectivity of different solar powered products and around integrating DC low voltage technology with AC technology at 220 volts. I think, however, that in this respect, the Indian market is ahead of developments in the African market, and that we expect to see what's happening in India right now, also in some of the African countries in just a few years from now. And I think that provides a brilliant opportunity for the Indian industry and for the Indian government, we think, to now develop India's potential as a technology and market leader. India can show African countries the way on how to integrate off-grid power solutions, distributed rooftop power generation and grid services in ways that are smart, lean and perhaps even frugal, but very effective, economic and robust. And we're not talking about a small market here. GOGLA thinks that by 2030 the industry globally should be able to power around 1 billion people with off-grid solar products. Now, to realize that, we would ask the Indian government to support our aim for strengthening India's position. And the government has a big role to play to ensure that, for instance, consumer electronics manufacturing in India can match international competition. For instance, by reducing taxes and import duties on products and components that still need to be imported. And we also ask the government to work with industry organizations in developing stronger business-to-consumer distribution capacities for new product and market segments, such as around solar-powered productive-use equipment, particularly for agricultural sectors. And most importantly, we ask the Indian government to adopt international standards and certification products and avoid introducing specific Indian standards. Why should they do that? Well, there are three big reasons. First, impact. Off-grid solar products offer basic electricity service at affordable cost with zero carbon emissions. They're reliable, can be rolled out fast, and are mobile. They're very effective in helping poor and remote households, small farmers, rural SMEs in improving their lives, reducing daily costs, growing incomes, and making them much more resilient, for example, to climate impacts, natural disasters, droughts, etc. Secondly, jobs. Producing and distributing off-grid solar products is a sure way to create valuable jobs in the millions, particularly in communities and regions where they are most needed. And thirdly, strengthening India's position as a climate leader promoting climate justice. India is, I would think, ideally placed to help other developing and emerging economies with the technical and market solutions needed to address energy access with zero carbon technologies, ensuring no one is left behind, and ensuring that the poorest and most remote communities can join the transition to net zero. That India doesn't play this role in the off-grid solar technology sector already, I think, is an omission, and it would be a real shame to miss the next big opportunity to change this. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe I just give an input that in the recent BRICS Business Council Energy and Green Economy under the Indian presidency, we did bring in a key agenda item of DDG energy, which was accepted by all countries. S in BRICS doesn't stand only for South Africa, but entire Africa. The New Development Bank has a branch in Joburg, and we have also proposed a Clean Environment Fund under the aegis of New Development Bank, so that there could be a, inter-BRICS cooperation, so the India-Africa cooperation which we were talking of. And we also brought in the need for standardization for the same reasons. But I'd like to ask you a last question. Do you see any danger of stranded assets with power grid expansion?
I don't think so. What we see in for instance, in Kenya, which has over the last few years also expanded electricity grid in significant ways, is that still a lot of people are purchasing off-grid solar products also when they're living near the grid or even under the grid. But we definitely need to work on how to build these standards so that the DC powered solutions can be better integrated in an AC grid powered reality. We think that there are definitely possibilities for that, and we've issued a white paper on that last year ourselves. There's much work to be done, but well, the products that the off-grid solar industry produces are, by its own design, super efficient. And of course, as a world, we do not need to only green degeneration, we also need to reduce consumption and increase efficiency. And I think there's much to be said for integrating the DC world with the AC world in smart ways, so that we boost efficiency and make sure that we have a smooth way of transitioning from off-grid solutions towards integrated approach.
That's marvelous. So now we swing the thing to the back. Derek, I've also had decades of relationship with L&T Group too, and I find your job title very interesting. Power, green manufacturing, integrated development, so very L&T-like, so it's very interesting to understand this thing. And of course, Mohit left two questions for you. I know you've done a lot of coal gasification in China, so your views on coal gasification, your views on CCU, and of course, the overall L&T story.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Krishnan. And first of all, I think it's a privilege, and thanks to MNRE and also FICCI for providing us this platform, to not only give our perspective, but to hear from our esteemed panel members, and debate on a very, very, I would say, contemporary subject. So, glad to know that you have a connect with L&T, and since possibly you are aware that we at L&T, being a more than an 8-decade-old company, have been in this power and energy sector for several decades. And whether it was the construction of the power plants or transmission, or we had the the switchgear division which we have now hived it off to Schneider. And then finally we also kind of teamed up with Mitsubishi to make our own turbines and boiler, which Mohit very correctly said, we now make supercritical boilers and ultra supercritical boilers and turbines for the power plants. So we were there in this entire kind of value chain of the fossil-based power plants for several years. And then we are seeing this transition now happening for real, for very, I would say, current reasons. We all are aware of where the environmental concerns are there. And as is usual, L&T is also positioning itself to transition into this new energy, green energy sector. And that's why I kind of wear both the hats, the power IC, where I actually oversee the complete fossil fuels, manufacturing and EPC, and even the combined cycle power plants. And now I have been entrusted to undertake this complete responsibility of looking at the complete value chain into the green energy sector. That's why it says green manufacturing and integrated development. So in a way, while Mohit did speak about our kind of association, not only the existing coal-based power plants of NTPC, now we are and there are elements of solar power plants that our TC division of power transmission and distribution PT&D were doing. We intend to be kind of present in this complete value chain, including the manufacturing of PV solar cells, and we have also participated in the PLI scheme, right from from the wafers, modules, and cells. We would also be partnering global technologies to manufacture advanced lithium-ion batteries and possibly even far more, let's say, sodium sulfur. We are also at the verge of kind of partnering with technologies for the electrolyzers or green hydrogen. And at the end of the day, the word integrated development, what kind of signifies that we want to play the entire value chain in the manufacturing, in the EPC space, as well as possibly with the hydrogen coming up in a big way, own assets and kind of work around the complete green hydrogen sector. So this is that complete thing that we are looking at. Huge opportunities, great change that is happening. And L&T is quite poised to kind of embark in this new area. You spoke about CCUS. So just before I kind of switch over, possibly your next question, Mr. Mohit very correctly said that we are partnering NTPC for a project which is kind of quite ambitious to look at utilizing the flue gas of a power plant, capturing the carbon dioxide. Then we are also putting up a green hydrogen plant. And finally, with the hydrogen and the carbon dioxide, we are also converting into green methanol. It's a kind of a pilot project. And upon its success, obviously there will be a scaled up version and a commercial version that we are looking at going forward. Having said so, these, Mr. Mohit very correctly said about the utilization and storage. So up to the carbon capture, the technologies are very much there in the world. Although not very, I would say, it's quite cost prohibitive, because if you look at it typically in a power plant, already the tariffs are under pressure, and then if you try to add the carbon capture, it actually pushes the tariff up. But unless and until there is a end, product, could be the methanol, green methanol, that could make it the value add in that could actually justify the cost of the CCUS. We believe the CCUS story is not going to work out. It has to have the end product to justify the cost, which at present does not look like.
So, Derek, this brings me to an important point. This hydrogenation of CO2. One is the large power plants, but what about biofuel plants? Whether I talk of biomethane or whether I talk of, ethanol, the CO2 content, would be of a ballpark of say 20 tons a day. If you want, it can be aggregated to 40 tons a day. Now out here, a conversion to methanol would have an immediate application in mobility. So do you visualize, if not right now, today, in the future, we can be looking at these kind of plants at smaller scale, economically?
See, the biomass possibly is obviously on the list, but quite down on the list for L&T, because we still believe that the story that is unfolding right now, provides huge business potential for us. Maybe in the renewables, battery, hydrogen, and then maybe partly CCL.
I'm not asking the L&T to get into the biofuel. I'm asking if CO2 is available. What is the smallest plant that you could think of working on? Purely to put a hydrogenation of CO2. Right?
Yeah. So right now, what we are looking at is very small pilot plants at 20 tons per hour, and that kind of a small plants. But going forward, you see, there are plants in the world with has about almost 6,000 tons per day, which is there in Texas, which captures carbon dioxide from power plants. But I think there's not many examples to prove that the large ones are still kind of economically viable. So we need to take these initial steps to move from 20 tons to move to maybe, let's say, 100 tons to. We have our idea that we'll start with 20 tons. Possibly the next one will be looking at 200 tons per day. Thereafter, but still these, if you look at it, these 200 tons per day or even 300 tons per day would be capturing a very minuscule part of the flue gas that comes out of a typical 500 or 600 megawatt power plant. So while you are possibly reducing the carbon dioxide, you really want to wonder that if this is the approach towards CO2 capture, don't we rather look at non-generation of CO2 versus generate and capture only a small part?
So you don't visualize a techno-economic viability of smaller plants, where I would be talking of something like 5 pph. You don't see the viability of a 5 pph CO2 hydrogenation plant.
See, you have to look at where will you utilize, which are the consumer or the industries which will use this 5 tons or 10 tons.
It'll be, it'll be 5 tons per hour. It'll be for methanol. Mobility.
Yeah, you're right. But is the end purpose only methanol? Or the end, this purpose is for the carbon dioxide capture?
Combination, obviously.
Yeah. So if you look at that, if you look at the total CO2 generated in the country,
carbon dioxide is free, negative cost if you get some carbon credits. So.
Yeah. See, at the end of the day, you are absolutely right. The smaller plants on a standalone could actually, possibly could become viable, could generate methanol, could be used for transportation. But if you look at the complete India story, the big CO2, let's say, emitters, are the power plants, followed by the steel plants and by the cement industry. So if we are not really addressing the big subject of capture or non-generation of CO2, and you look at the other elements, then possibly our objectives are different.
We'll discuss this later, but if you talk of the 20% blending ethanol, and if you talk of the 15 million ton bio-CNG, we are already talking of 50-60 million tons of CO2. So it's not too insignificant, but I won't press on that. What about your storage thing? You said batteries. Your focus is very clear on batteries and multiple technologies, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I think the renewable sector, which is opening up in a big way, unless and we can look at its the manner in which the informed power is being talked about, unless and until storage, especially through stationary batteries of a grid, are not available, it's not going to work out. And we believe that story, and that is why we are focusing on manufacturing of batteries for stationary applications only, which is hugely debated in my own organization, because typically, batteries, people are looking at EVs, which is the bigger sector to look at. Whereas we are continuing to focus on the stationary application, and we are actually at the at a particular point where we are talking to very large global companies who have the technology and also have a roadmap for technology, because this batteries technology is evolving continuously, and especially in the stationary sector, you have to have the cycle improvement on a continuous basis. It's moved from 3,000 to 5,000 to 7,000 and possibly will go higher, and hence batteries, manufacturing, and coupled with PV, and I said we'll play the whole thing, including the hydrogen part of it, is going to be the L&T story.
Thank you so much. Now, Kishore, you have always dramatically scaled up, companies. So, and Avada, what is your current ambition to scaling up as influence solar and wind, and then into transition into round-the-clock power? And I know you have a hydrogen story also, so would you share your thoughts with us?
Thank you, Mr. Krishnan and FICCI for inviting me and giving me a platform to speak at this August conference. I've been associated with FICCI for last more than 10 years, right from we started when our renewable energy story. As far as Avada is concerned, we are one of the oldest players in the RE sector in India. We started, like I said, 10 years. So this is where I started. We started as Wellspun in those days, and Wellspun got transitioned into Avada Energy. So we started our journey in 2010 with 3 core projects totaling to about 5,000 megawatt. But quickly we realized that we wanted to be in the RE sector. We are not going to be in the thermal sector, so we immediately transitioned from thermal to the renewable energy in 2011. My first project, I personally I started with NTPC 37 years back, and like Mohit was explaining, I saw the transition from the current NTPC to National Thermal Power Corporation. That is where we started with, and from pure play, coal player to gas projects to, then I moved into Bechtel and then Reliance, and we were working on supercritical projects of 660 megawatt projects, ultra mega projects. We were having a capacity of about 25,000 megawatt of thermal capacity. So when we transitioned from thermal to solar, for me personally, this was a transition from 660 to 6 megawatt project, because that was the first solar project that we were doing, and we commissioned the first project was 6 megawatt project. In those days, 6 megawatt itself was big projects, and when the National Solar Mission started, the capacity of those projects were at 5 megawatt project. So that's where we started with the solar mission, and then the solar project started. And we were the first company to commission a 5 megawatt project under the National Solar Mission, for which we got an award, being the first company to commission the project under JNNSM. But then we immediately realized the potential for thinking big and growing big. So then we did a 50 megawatt project. In those days when people were talking about 5 megawatt project, that was the second project, second largest project in Asia. So that was a 50 megawatt project won under the National Solar Mission. In the next year, we had the courage to go big, and we commissioned a 151 megawatt project in MP. So that was world's second largest project. So in nutshell, we realized the potential to grow big in the renewable sector, and that is where we did some of the largest projects. And then we transitioned from Wellspun to Avada, and we relaunched as Wellspun 2 or Avada 1. And then we started building our own capacity, and today we have an operational capacity of 1,650 megawatt of operational capacity, with an under construction pipeline of another 3,000 megawatt. We are expecting total operational capacity of 4,500 plus capacity by in the next 6 months or so. By March, April, we are looking at a capacity of that, and we have got additional pipeline of another 500, which would probably come by end of 22 or so. And we are looking at 11 gigawatt capacity, operational capacity by 2025, and 30 gigawatt capacity by 2006. That's our dream and pipeline. As far as diversity is concerned, we did various projects. In fact, we did, while we were in Welspun, we did the pure play solar projects. We were the first company to do a wind project from concept to commissioning, starting from identification of the project to doing everything by in-house team. And we just bought the machine or materials and we did the entire wind project by our own. So we built a complete EPC turnkey EPC execution capability within us. We did the projects with a tracker. We also ventured into floating solar projects. That was one of our commitments to sustainability in terms of water conservation. And we did in almost all our projects, we have our water harvesting, and all the water harvested or collected through the drains are collected in a storage pond. And adding more into that, we did floating solar projects in the storage ponds where we collected the water. That will again help the evaporation of water. So as far as the solar is concerned, we took all aspects into it. Storage plants. And storage is, I think, an area where Derisha was also mentioning about large-scale solar projects. I think I had taken up this issue with MNRE about 4 or 5 years back, and I realized the potential for storage in India, because that time everyone was talking about manufacturing of solar PV modules in India, where China had already gone miles ahead of us. So I realized the potential for getting into the manufacturing in the storage or battery manufacturing as the large scale manufacturing. So I thought that is an area where China had really not got into in a big way in battery manufacturing or storage solutions, and maybe India could have done much better by incentivizing in terms of some subsidies or giving some incentives for attracting more investments into the storage. I think probably we missed the bus and China had again captured that market, but it is still not late. We need to get into the manufacturing, and with the large inflow of RE capacity into the sector, we are getting into grid stability, and that is where the significance is coming more into RE projects coupled with storage solutions or the round-the-clock solutions, and I think that is going to be the future of RE sector in India. Now we are talking about hybrid projects where the wind and solar projects are combined and going with the hybrid capacity. This is some way it is complementing each other, because the solar projects has got a peak generation starting from morning and picking up in the afternoon or maybe towards the noon and going down by about 4 o'clock, and the wind projects picking up around 4 o'clock, and that gives some sort of stability in the availability of power from a daily basis as well as on a seasonal basis. The solar projects generate the lowest during the monsoon season, and that is the time when wind projects are generating high. So this hybrid solution is somewhat complementing each other to give a balanced generation. But with the more inflow of informed power into the sector, the grid stability is becoming a major issue, and that's where the storage solution plays a major role in the grid balancing. With more and more power coming, RE power, informed power coming into the grid, I think the stability will be a major issue, and we need to look at RTC power along with the storage solution. I think that is becoming more critical aspects with more capacity getting added into the system.
Great. Kishore, in your hybrid of solar and wind, what is the CUF that you are as a median targeting?
The hybrid solution for wind and solar, the target CUF is roughly around 40%. 40 to 45% is the target. We should be looking at wind solar hybrid. Even the SECI tenders which came up, they were also having CUF in that range. See, the advantage today is that now with the higher or larger wind machines with the larger hub heights and rotor dia, the wind projects are giving higher PLF. Solar projects are still struggling to be in the range of 20s, even with the 40 to 50% DC overloading. This can at best try for about 28 to 30%. But wind projects which can give higher PLF of maybe 40 plus or in the range of 40, we can look at an average PLF of around 40% in a hybrid solution.
So we let the pendulum swing back. Well, we don't have Mautishi to join us. So I wanted, if you could give some inputs on the role that foundations play in supporting this form of decentralized generation and localized consumption of electricity.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't really catch it.
It goes without saying that we a lot of SDGs if we can have decentralized power generation and diverse applications for utilizing this power. But classical funding raises its own challenges. So what are the role of foundations and development financial institutions in supporting these initiatives?
Decentralized.
No, this is for Cohen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I would have loved to hear the answer of Kishore as well. So where we are at with the price point for off-grid solar technology is that these can be more or less sold at cost at the commercial price to households, but not to everyone. There are still households for which these products are not affordable and where targeted subsidization is needed. I think if we're looking at, for instance, mini-grid solution, that picture changes, and we'll need to have more degree of subsidization. And we also have a different picture when we're talking about solar water pumps and standalone solar-powered agro-processing, agro-cooling installations, refrigeration installations. A higher degree of subsidization will be needed to make sure that we will be able to sell these products at scale and deliver all the impacts that we want to do. Foundations can play an important role in helping innovative companies get beyond the seed financing stage and attract financing further, and can certainly also play a role in helping product become affordable. But if we look at larger volumes of markets, then I think foundations might be limited in their resources, and we'll need to look at other ways. So I think where we are in our market, concessional financing from public resources, from philanthropic sources are critical, but in a much smaller volume than traditionally would have been needed to establish connectivity for electrification.
Because it's really not a question of IRR. It's very often getting the initial funding, classical project financing without collaterals and stuff like that. So, but right now we're able to manage without too much of that support, is it?
Yeah, of course, access to finance. We are an industry that's made up of a few dozen larger players that sell in the order of tens of millions and some are above hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and then a long tail of companies that are selling in the range of millions of dollars of products a year or below that. And all these companies are definitely they're struggling to find financing, equity financing, and debt financing, and some of them will definitely also need grant financing, concessional financing to get out of the seed financing stage. We think that is a more important role for concessional, public, and philanthropic financing than for subsidies, but both are needed to deliver the impact. And of course, we are looking at. For our market, we're looking at the poor and remote customers, of which there are hundreds of millions that are still not connected, and hundreds of millions more that have very core electricity services, reaching those at fully commercial terms is it's not quite possible yet.
Thanks. Derek, coming back to you, obviously you also see hydrogen as a major thrust area. Now, in your opinion, for electrolyzers, what should be a band of minimum CUF for hydrogen to get competitive?
Yeah, so right now from where to $8 to $9, we are already talking 111, and you've heard about that $1 in 1 decade and all that. So it's I think that's the way it has to go forward. But there's a huge journey that you've come down from $8, right, to even possibly people are right talking about under $4, and by the time it really goes lower than $2. What I feel is it's like it's not possibly the right analogy, but the way it has happened in, let's say, in IoT or telecom, and where possibly you and I, when we used to speak earlier, it used to be 15 rupees per minute to now so cheap to be speaking of, or possibly free.
It is.
So what I feel is the complete ecosystem around the generation of hydrogen, the policy support, including all user industries, including possibly the it has already started. You can see in refineries now there's a mandate to actually blend 5% green hydrogen into the blue hydrogen. Going forward, possibly new refineries will be mandated to go only for new green hydrogen. Then we are already starting to talk about green steel, and the way the consumer awareness will come up. There are people in Europe who possibly buy, let's say, white goods only if it is made out of green steel, and are ready to pay a couple of $100 more for that particular green steel. So there is this consumer awareness, there is this policy support, there is this complete technology. See, the technology also in hydrogen is still evolving. We moved from the alkaline to PEM, and possibly it has to go to solid state before we talk of higher efficiencies of these electrolyzers. So a combination of the technology, the policy support, the consumer awareness will all help to drive down the cost of hydrogen in a big way. And then we could be already be talking of the the low numbers that are already being spoken about.
No, I fully agree with you that we need a demand pull, and definitely this aspects like, particularly steel, you'll find that there'll be a whole lot of consumers that can be sensitized to, first of all, the automobile and appliances manufacturers optimize the content of steel and then, go for the green steel and take the premium. But just coming to physics, are you looking at less than 40 kilowatt hour per kg of hydrogen?
See, these are
It has 33 kilowatt hour energy, what's the efficiency you can get in electrolyzer,
Yeah.
And then, if you have to operate an electrolyzer at 40-50% CUF, the electrolyzer price has to crash. Or you operate at higher CUF, and your stored solar energy cost has to crash. So
you are actually hit the nail on the head. We need to understand that we need to understand that when we're talking about the hydrogen and the cost of hydrogen, 70% of it actually comes on the renewable power. So it's the electrolyzer per se, the technology and everything that we can talk about, and how its efficiency can go up, but it is also linked to the reduction of the renewable power, which is already here happening. So a combination of this, the lowering cost of the let's say renewable power, and higher technologies and increased efficiencies could actually end up giving you the hydrogen and the numbers that we just spoke about. It's not only electrolyzers. Electrolyzers, and let me be very honest, this electrolyzer, we are talking about it today. Electrolyzers existed even for 30 years back. just because nobody was using or nobody was talking about the hydrogen the way it has been talked today, the alkaline technology is not a new technology. So I think we are to see the good days when the hydrogen and the complete, as very beautifully said, that every sector, including transportation and the core industries, and especially once we're talking about ammonia, green ammonia, then possibly then we have completely changed the concept of energy into renewable. We could be actually transporting energy from India if that is the case. We could actually create this huge hub of renewable power, hydrogen generation, and transport green ammonia across the world. Who knows?
So, taking a similar train of thought, what's the kind of targeting that you have got for stored renewable energy? At what level do you think it will emerge? Not now, maybe 5-10 years from now.
You're talking in terms of the absolute numbers?
Yes, because here again we're talking very ambitious figures. And you see, what my concern is sometimes we are driving down the cost of, a premium product such as dispatchable RE power, and we want it so cheap, which perhaps is not necessary. So that's why I'm trying to lead this dialogue. What do you really think should be a realistic figure for stored RE power?
See, in that 450 gigawatts, possibly what has been done now, and let's say we are talking about the stored power. We were looking at something like it would be upwards of 100 gigawatts. So now, obviously, this has not taken into consideration everything that's happening around the hydrogen part of it. The moment you bring the hydrogen and getting the green hydrogen, the numbers go much more in multiples of this. So
no, I was talking of rupees per kilowatt hour of stored solar.
Right now, where it has gone from $1,000 per kilowatt hour. Now it has already come to 130. Now we clearly see 80, 85 is going to come down in the next 3 to 4 years. 80 to 85 dollars per kilowatt hour will definitely come down. If you listen to Mr. Tony Siba, he'll talk of a much lower figure than going from below lower than 80 or even $70 going forward, because this is a combination of these technologies, everything going down, and it's a fact. Because you see, point is, we look at batteries of $1,000 per kilowatt hour, where right now if you look at it 130, it's not only the lithium or the cobalt or the nickel or the metallurgy which has changed around the electrodes, it's the energy density which has gone massive from 100 now to 250, and possibly we are now talking in terms of 450 energy density also. And if the energy density actually goes up to 700, 800, you are packing more energy into the same cell, and hence the dollar per kilowatt hour drops much more. You could end up seeing.
And the recharging cycle will go up from 5,000 to 10,000?
Yeah. Right now, charging cycles are already in 4,000, 5,000. We are already talking to technologies who talk about 7,000, and possibly next gen they are talking about 10,000. So cycles are also going up.
Great. Sure. You have definite hydrogen plans, isn't it?
No, we have not yet started. We are still, nobody has the hydrogen plant as it is, but we are also looking at exploring the options of hydrogen. Like Derek said, it is the cost and the volume that can drive down the prices. But I think hydrogen is still far away. I would suggest that storage probably is an immediate market available today to meet our goals, and maybe hydrogen will take maybe another 5 years, I would say, to go really commercial.
Coming back to you, in this, impact of pandemic, as part of your distributed energy solutions, I guess cold chain infrastructure is getting important, and from a long-term perspective also for horticulture and decentralized food processing.
Yes, that's absolutely true. COVID is one of the many big incidents that we've seen in across the world. But as climate change is moving on, we might expect many more natural disasters. I think off-grid solar solutions, by their ability to work independent infrastructure networks and by their ability to be rolled out quickly and be used in mobile ways, as a big role to play in strengthening the resilience of households, of farmers, of businesses, of institutions. And I think that's a big substantial strength that valuing will hopefully come to value more as unfortunately we'll have to deal with more climate powered disasters.
Are you sometimes thinking of utilizing electricity to produce ice and use ice as passive refrigeration?
Well, solar powered refrigeration is definitely a theme. We produced a market report ourselves earlier this year to see what's the potential that off-grid solar can contribute to refrigeration and various forms of refrigeration, including freezing